right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. We're learning new details and getting a glimpse inside a closed-door hearing in the case that involves the University of Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger, as a judge unsealing this 175 partially redacted transcript of that hearing on the defense team related to genetic evidence. Of course, following it very closely as the defense trying to portray the investigative genealogy evidence, or IgG, as improperly left out of the probable cause affidavit used to justify several warrants in the case. The judge ultimately rejected the defense motion to have the IgG evidence tossed, finding that nothing the FBI did violated Kohberger's constitutional rights. We're going to be joined right now by criminal defense attorney, friend of the program, Nicole DeBoard. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. It was interesting to look into this, to hear some of the transcript, hear from the defense, the prosecution on this IgG evidence. What do we make of this ruling from the judge today?
It's very surprising. Despite the fact that the science on IgG evidence is relatively new, the case law has spun out as fairly consistent, saying that this is something that's permissible because this genealogical research is possible because genealogical information and DNA samples are uploaded voluntarily, oftentimes and most times, into a system that are used to do research and trace back DNA to a particular potential donor. So I'm not surprised by the ruling, but I'm also not at all surprised that the defense took the time to raise this important issue.
Yeah, and of course it is very important because this is new technology, new information that they are gathering as well. In terms of the fact that they left it off this probable cause affidavit, the prosecution admitted so that they left it off on purpose. Does that surprise you in any way?
Does surprise me a little bit. It does make you wonder, right? If the prosecution is ever leaving details, any detail, out of information that they're supposed to be providing to the court about how a case should be considered and whether or not there's probable cause for a search, you have to ask yourself why. Why is that particular detail something that the prosecution would want to keep secret? And the fact that they found this information through genealogical research kind of telegraphs to me that maybe at the time that they hid that particular data from the defense or from putting it in the probable cause affidavit, tells me that perhaps they were a little worried that maybe this would not withstand legal scrutiny by a court. Now, case law has consistently told us differently in recent months as these cases are reviewed, but it is something that is jarring to see someone purposefully leave data out of a probable cause affidavit.
Yeah, and they apparently didn't know the name Bryan Kohberger until very late, until this IgG evidence was moved forward, and then they kind of corroborated potentially his involvement in this case, ultimately leading to his arrest, and now we're at the case. If this had gone through, though, would prosecution have to throw out some of those other pieces of evidence that corroborated this IgG? Would that have been the process?
Sure, that's exactly what the defense was hoping for, is to have the judge take a look at how this particular information came into their possession so that they could link evidence to this case and ultimately Kohberger, and have the judge throw it out.
Yeah, it's so very interesting. And I do want to ask you just about this IgG, because it wasn't very long ago that maybe DNA evidence was still in its infancy. That's come obviously more mainstream. Is the kind of trajectory of this IgG to become more stream? Is that kind of the trajectory of it?
I think that it is absolutely the trajectory we can expect. As law enforcement becomes more and more familiar with the tool of being able to research DNA through family histories of people who have voluntarily put their DNA into databases that can be investigated by law enforcement, I think we will continue to see law enforcement use it. And what we're seeing from the case law is there's really nothing to prevent them from doing so.
Yeah, it's so very interesting because it's a fascinating technology about this. And of course, there's different platforms, different databases, and some databases don't allow law enforcement, don't allow police to look into that. Is that going to be any part of the defense's case about that, that some of these platforms, some of these genealogy platforms don't actually allow police to look through them to potentially tie suspects the crimes.
I think that's certainly one prong where we could see further concern from the defense and further motion work from the defense. Another potential issue is that we can't assume that the science behind, if there was science employed behind trying to trace back, if you will, this evidence in this DNA sample to people who are unrelated to Kohberger or unrelated to the case that Kohberger is being investigated, and then ultimately tying it back to Kohberger actually makes sense. We're really gonna need to see some scientific testimony to determine whether or not whatever techniques were employed were in fact employed correctly and that they're scientifically recognized as valid scientific methods.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Of course, on now, Bryan Kohberger's defense team is an expert on DNA forensics, an attorney there, so that is a key component. I do want to ask you about this because it is fascinating, new age technology, and it's also a little bit difficult to understand. Do you think that will be determinant in what they want in a jury as well, that they have to understand some of these concepts that are before them?
I think that's right. And I think that it'll be important for this defense team to really understand the evidence well enough for themselves through the use of their own experts to be able to have someone who can testify potentially to poke holes in what the state wants to present as just scientific evidence and show that it's really a lot more complicated than maybe the state lets on, and that there's not just some easy machine you can put this data in and then some answer is spit out for them to assume is absolutely correct. It doesn't work like that, and they're going to need a jury who can ultimately understand the complications kind of technique.
And they also made that case, the defense did, about the speed, the rapid nature in which that they got some of this information back from this genealogy platform as well. In terms of what comes next in this, Nicole, what do we keep our eyes on for this case involving Bryan Kohberger?
I think that we will continue to see this defense team do very careful, diligent detail work and make sure that every single concern they have about every piece of evidence that's been collected and then attributed in some way to being relevant in this case, you're going to see motions filed so that this appellate record is preserved, even if they don't expect necessarily for the judge to rule in their favor, because this case is going to be around for a long time, even well past its trial date.
Yeah, that is so very true. But you believe still on course for that over the summer, a little bit later on this year, the trial to begin. You still believe that to be true?
I do. It looks like the judge is really trying to carefully consider the motions as they're presented to keep this case on its course for the trial date.
All right, on track, and of course, very much still in the headlines, this case as the unsealing there of this transcript of a closed-door hearing. All right, Nicole, thank you so much for your insight, your perspective. Very fascinating there out of Idaho. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.